All right, let's take a look at what we have here. We're going to simplify complex numbers. A complex number is when you have a real component, which is going to be just a number, and then you have an imaginary component that is actually an imaginary I. It has like the little curly tail on that. And the reason why we do that is because if we use just the regular looking I, people might confuse that as a variable like X or Z. So we use the little curly part of the I there to notate that that is the imaginary I. All right, so let's take a look at some of our information here. So we are going to combine like terms. That means numbers are going to go with numbers and I's are going to go with I's. And we have to apply the -1 rule when we are subtracting. We'll talk about that with example 2 here in just a second. Look at our first example here. Since we are adding everything, we can drop the parentheses and combine like terms. So we have -2, +6, and +3. We're going to put those three together. Here we go. -2 plus 6 is 4. Then I need to combine that 4 with a 3. That gives me +7. Now what we need to do is combine our imaginary components. We have 1i. We need to combine that with -4i. 1 minus 4 is -3, so that is -3i. And this is our answer. Okay, let's take a look at example 2. Example 2, this time we have some subtracting. So we want to look where the subtraction sign is, and we want to apply the -1 rule to the parentheses behind the subtraction sign. The -1 rule is simply just changing positives to negatives and negatives to positives. We're changing the signs inside the parentheses. So we look right here. We're going to change this to a positive or a plus, and everybody in the parentheses to the right here or behind it is going to change. Positive turns negative, positive turns negative. We need to apply this -1 rule here to the second set of parentheses here. Change it to positive. This turns negative, and the 4i turns negative. That reverts back to just an addition problem, which means we can drop the parentheses and combine like terms. So let's start with our number, or our numbers here. We have -3 and -2. -3 minus 2 is -5. Let's combine our imaginary components here. -3 minus 5 is -8i. Then I need to combine that with -4i. -8 minus 4 is -12i. And this is our answer. All right, let's look down here at multiplying. Multiplying has a special rule here also. And if you look in brackets, it says if you get an I squared, we're going to substitute a -1 for I squared. Let's multiply. Maybe. So let's look at example 1. When we multiply them just like we would with variables. So we multiply the numbers, we add the exponents with the variables here. 4 times 3 is 12. I times I is I squared. This is 12 times I squared. 12 times I squared. If you go back up here, we have this rule right here where we say that I squared is the same as -1. So substitute a -1 for I squared. And when you do that, you get -12. So I guess the question is, what did I squared do to the 12 in the original problem right here? Well, it's almost like it's applying the -1 rule. It's changing that +12 to -12, and it did. Let's look at example 2. We're going to multiply this out like we would a multi-distribution, or you could apply the FOIL method here. We're going to start with 2 and multiply it over here to the right. 2 times 3 is 6. Multiply the 2 out again. 2 times -5i is -10i. Let's distribute the 4i here. It's positive. 4i times 3 is +12i. Distribute that one more time. 4 times -5 is -20. I times I is I squared. And we said that if you get I squared, right, we have to substitute -1, so we could do that off to the side here. 20 times negative 1. We're substituting I squared for negative 1. I'm sorry, negative 20 times negative 1. All that's going to do is turn this to positive 20. So we'll rewrite what we have. Now we're ready to combine like terms. I'm going to start with my numbers. So we have 6 plus 20 is 26. And we are going to put our i's together. Negative 10 plus 12 is positive 2i. Now you can use the calculator for this. I want to show you how you can use the calculator and find the imaginary I, not the letter I, because the letter I is a variable. We want to use the imaginary I. I'm going to open up TI Nspire here. Go to New Calculator. And do not use any variables here on the keyboard. Do not use this letter I. If I use this letter I and I press enter, I'm going to get an error because it says that's a variable. Well, we don't want to use I as a variable. We want to use imaginary I. Imaginary I have this saying, I is behind pi. So if you look at your calculator, find the pi button. You can see that there's the little imaginary I. See how it's got the little curly tail on the end? We can use that. So what I want to do is I want to look at the last example we did. We have to use our parentheses. 2 plus 4. Remember, I is behind pi. And then 3 minus 5. I is behind pi. Press enter. 26 plus 2i. That was the answer that we ended up getting for example 2. So you can use a calculator. If you want to do the paper method, you can. Just don't forget about applying the negative 1 rule. Don't forget about I squared is negative 1. But you can also use the calculator. Just remember, I is behind pi.